Christian education is at a crossroads both in our country and in our community. If the emphasis is not renewed in our churches as well as in our homes, Christian education will simply be a movement discussed in our history books. Hi, my name is Dan Curallo, and I'm pastor of Morganton Baptist Church and administrator of Morganton Christian Academy. The Lord has allowed me to see Christian education from a variety of angles, all of which have helped form my convictions regarding it. I had the privilege of attending a Christian school all of my life, and I know the effect that it had on my decision to serve the Lord. I've also had the opportunity to see Christian education from a parent's perspective, from a teacher's perspective, from an administrator's perspective, as well as from a pastor and youth pastor's perspective. I've had the opportunity of watching God take and transform lives and students graduate to serve Him. There are two foundational statements behind what we'll discuss today. The first is that I believe that the Word of God clearly communicates that Christian education is absolutely essential for the total development of any child. In fact, if a child does not get a Christian education, I believe he has not been educated. The second foundational truth is that we are very quickly losing our young people to the influence of the world. The truth is, it really shouldn't be surprising when we consider just a few simple facts. A student who is in school from 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock will be in school for 35 hours in the course of a week. If the parent picks that child up at 3 o'clock and spends every moment with them until 9 o'clock, in that same 5 days, they will only be spending 30 hours with them. If a student attends all church services, he's probably only in church for about 4 hours in the course of a week. Consider the damage that is done to a child by placing him in an anti-God educational system as well as an anti-God environment. Can our churches possibly compensate in only 4 hours a week plus some activities that with which our young people are being bombarded with daily? I believe the spiritual needs of America clearly indicate that we are losing this battle. We are watching an anti-God agenda being pushed through America at an alarming rate. Why should we be surprised when we've taught our students an anti-God education and an anti-God way of life? Consider what America will be like in 20 or perhaps 30 years. In 30 to 40 years, our president will be chosen from someone in our current classroom. I believe that it is absolutely imperative that the home, the church, and the school all be built on a solid biblical philosophy of life. There are several problems within our educational system. Let me be sure to state that the problem is not at all with our teachers. There are several who are good and very godly teachers who are in our public school system, and we are thankful for them. Yet the fact is that the public school system has chosen to remove the only absolute authority of truth, God and the Bible. The results of this decision are devastating. George Barna from the Barna Group of Ventura, California, did a survey shortly after 9/11/2001 in which 1,010 adults and 604 teenagers were asked two questions. The first question they asked was, are there moral absolutes that are unchanging, or is moral truth relative to the circumstances? The answers showed that 64% of adults said truth is always relative to the person and their situation. 83% of teenagers said truth depends on circumstances, but only 6% of teenagers said truth is absolute. The remaining 11% of teenagers did not know. Of individuals who claimed to be born again, only 32% of adults and 9% of teens believed in moral absolutes. That statistic alone shows our churches are not being as successful as perhaps thought. George Barna then wisely made the following conclusion. Just 1 out of 10 of our country's born-again teenagers believe in absolute moral truth, a statistic that is nearly identical to that of non-born-again teens. Christian families, educators, and churches must prioritize this matter if the Christian community hopes to have any distinctiveness in our culture. The virtual disappearance of this cornerstone of the Christian faith, that is, God has communicated a series of moral principles in the Bible that are meant to be the basis of our thoughts and actions, regardless of our preferences, feelings, or situations, is probably the best indicator of the waning strength of the Christian church in America today. The second question asked by George Barna was, what is the basis for moral and ethical decisions? The results varied greatly. 30% of adults and 38% of teenagers said whatever feels right or comfortable in a situation. 15% of adults and only 10% of teenagers said the values taught by their parents. 13% of adults and 7% of teenagers claimed to make decisions based on the Bible. Of those who claimed to be born again, only 26% of adults and 12% of teenagers make decisions based on the Bible. This led to two observations by George Barna. Substantial numbers of Christians believe that activities such as abortion, gay sex, sexual fantasies, cohabitation, drunkenness, and viewing pornography are morally acceptable. He also made the following observation. Without some firm and compelling basis for suggesting that such acts are inappropriate, people are left with philosophies such as, if it feels good, do it. Everyone else is doing it, or as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else, it's permissible. In fact, the alarmingly fast decline of moral foundations among our young people has culminated in a one-word worldview: whatever. To combat these effects, parents, churches, and schools must all emphasize the authority of the Word of God and that it alone must be the basis for all of our decisions in life. Another problem in the public education system is the false notion that education equals improvement. Horace Mann, the father of American public education, made this statement in the 1800s. If American taxpayers could provide education for every child in America, within a short period of time, the effect of the public school system would empty all the jails and prisons in the country. Let the home and church teach faith and values, and the school teach facts. In keeping with this philosophy, we have provided sex education to help curb teenage pregnancy. God's standard of absolute morality and purity is no longer held or even taught. We have also provided drug education to help curb the spread of drugs. Yet both of these philosophies have failed miserably. We don't need education, we need God. That leads to the following question. If God is the only one who can change a person's life, how can a system that has removed God be successful? The answer is that it can't. Yet so many people place their children in an anti-God educational system as well as an anti-God environment only to find themselves asking the question, what happened to my child? Is our goal merely to raise a good kid who doesn't get into any major problems? Or is our goal to raise a child that is truly useful to Christ? The answer to that question will form your philosophy of education. The Bible has provided a very clear biblical framework for education. In fact, if we choose to not follow God's pattern of education, we will find ourselves disobedient to that which God has very clearly commanded us to follow. Deuteronomy 6:4-9 provides the following framework for education. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. In the 1960s, the public schools chose to remove the Word of God and prayer from its system. The results are indeed very tragic. Notice how the passage changes when the Word of God and all references to it are removed. The removal of the Word of God opens the door for any prevalent philosophy to be taught in its place. There are several questions that you as an individual must answer. Has God clearly communicated in His Word how we are to educate our children? I believe the answer is yes. Does God's will ever contradict His Word? I believe the answer is no. Is it ever God's will for a system that has removed God to educate our child, even if we've prayed about it? Proverbs 19:27 states, "Cease, my son, to hear the instruction that causeth to err from the words of knowledge." That which could cause one to err from the knowledge of God must be rejected. How can we as believers place our children in an educational system as well as an environment where God is not welcome? One of the biggest concerns I hear is, "I can't afford it." How much would you pay in light of your child and eternity? I would suggest enroll your child and trust God to meet the needs. Meanwhile, adjust your financial priorities. What price is too high for your child? Your goals will determine your philosophy of education. Many parents have very worthy goals, such as a good college, a successful career, a nice home or a family. While these goals are good, there are goals that are much greater than that. Consider the goals of salvation. A child who is conformed to the image of Christ. One who is fully equipped to be able to go and serve God with his life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If I can be of assistance to you, or if you would like more information regarding our school, please contact our office at 828-437-1897. My prayer is that Christian education will once again thrive in our community.